Welcome to The Last Word on Product Marketing, a podcast hosted by Liza Cichowski, founder of Last Word Marketing. Liza helps MarTech and AdTech companies align product strategy with marketing execution. On her podcast, Liza and her guests talk about how to avoid pitfalls and achieve success in product marketing.
It's another episode of The Last Word on Product Marketing podcast. I'm Liza Cichowski, a fractional product marketer and consultant with Last Word Marketing, and your host of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited to talk to Heather Macaulay, who leads go-to-market strategy, serving as president of MadTech. If you don't know about MadTech, you will soon enough because it's growing like crazy. It's a two-pronged business. The first half of the company is a consultancy that helps advertising, media, and data companies solve hard problems and drive revenue growth. The other half of MadTech is called MadConnect, which is a platform that helps companies reduce the operational burden of integrating their data and systems in a seamless, reliable, and privacy-safe environment. Heather has more than 15 years of digital media experience with a strong background in sales, business development, and B2B marketing. Before she joined MadTech, she held leadership roles at Zoom, Publishers Clearinghouse, and PubMatic. She has taught courses in mobile marketing at NYU for many years and frequently speaks in front of audiences at Adweek, Brand Innovators, BTV, and more. Obviously, I'm very lucky to have her on my podcast. So welcome to you, Heather. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. And I feel so lucky being here as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today, Liza.
Wonderful. Okay, let's jump right in to the crux of it. As a leader on the MadTech team and someone that is always trying to balance sales and marketing roles, aligning the marketing with corporate strategy can be difficult and a moving target. Have you experienced that kind of friction, and how do you work to ensure alignment in your day-to-day?
Absolutely, especially given that so much of my career has been spent building businesses inside of businesses. And I think that is really indicative of what a lot of companies are experiencing right now in advertising and marketing, because you have a lot of retail media networks and commerce media networks trying to build these businesses, new products for new markets. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that product marketing is often very misunderstood or even undervalued in organization. It's not necessarily always the first wave of hires. I've been in organizations where there was no product marketing for quite some time, and you can really feel that. You can feel the gap immediately. That missing intersection between product, between sales and marketing creates real inefficiencies. And if you asked, 5 different people what product marketing does, even within this, ecosystem, you'd probably get 5 slightly different answers. Whereas, sales is pretty cut and dry when it comes to a definition. So we think of, all the different, things that product marketing is looking after: positioning and messaging and go-to-market strategy and sales enablement and market and custom insights. There's a lot there. And I also feel that there's sometimes unrealistic expectations around delivery, especially as it relates to go-to-market. So what I've found, whether you're hiring for a product marketing role or you've been in that role for some time, is really kind of redefine what that means within your organization and be really transparent and communicate that well from the top and all around you, top, bottom, all of that, because it's aligning people to that, aligning people to what you are here to achieve and the support that you need to achieve that. And I think being really transparent about, how long timelines take, right? How long things are going to get going. And I think having that transparency, having that communication is really important. And one other factor I have found, and even hiring for this role, is yes, hire for those skills, but also make sure the person in that role is persuasive, that is able to tell a good story and be able to be a really strong communicator. Because when your CEO is telling you he wants something, launched yesterday and all this revenue around it, you need to be okay pushing back and explaining why and reminding him or her again and again of that fact.
That's so true about the misunderstanding of what product marketing is. I experience that quite frequently. And most people think it's just creating sales decks. I love creating sales decks, but I also love doing all the work that goes into a good sales deck, and all the strategy, et cetera. That's great. So what is a strategy or initiative you've implemented that has made an impact? Or on the other side of it, what have you
Yeah.
tried that has not made an impact?
Yeah, so I can be honest on both there. So I started my career in sales in 2008 in New York, and it was a really tricky time because the market was collapsing. All these digital ad budgets were drying up, and no one had money for, testing and emerging media like mobile was at the time. So I would go into these sales pitches and I could see just like everyone's eyes glazing over because they just didn't want to talk about something that was new and shiny and sexy at that moment because they were just trying to survive. So I went back to the marketing team and said, we have to figure out another approach here because this isn't working and our go-to-market's not working. And so what we decided to do is provide some different type of value versus just trying to say, hey, buy, our mobile ad network. And so what we realized is that at some point in time, the CEO or CMO of the brand that agency was representing was going to ask questions about mobile advertising and mobile marketing and what that was. And we wanted the agency to be prepared to answer those questions. And be looking like an expert in the room. And so what we did is we changed our go-to-market approach to be less about this is what we're selling and more consultative so that we showed that we were experts around mobile advertising and marketing. So we created presentations, we created collateral, we created content around educating the market on what it was. And when I would go into that sales room and oftentimes bring someone from product with me to help explain something more technical, we were able to become more teachers than sellers. And what ended up happening is that when those mobile budgets came a few months later, the agencies called us first in many, many instances because they looked at us as those experts and then we were owning that topic and we were really good storytellers around that versus just trying to sell a product. So that was an initiative that works really well. And I still try to bring education and be a consultative seller. And I tell the sales team to do that as well. I would say in terms of what hasn't worked for me before was, early on in my career in marketing and in sales, realizing that launching a new product in a new market is much more difficult than launching, a new product to an existing market or an existing product to a new market, right? And so a misstep we took was just rushing the go-to-market, right? Not doing our due diligence and slowing down. And I talked before about setting those proper expectations at the top, trying to get the executive team so excited about the opportunity and not spending enough time having them understand how long it would take to do a lot of research, understand the demand, right? Create a product that would be a real market fit. I don't think we were wrong in the sense that it was a good product for the right market. But the executive team was just frustrated with how long it took to see those wins and ended up saying, you know what, this is probably not worth it. Let's move on to something else. So having said that, I try to tell everyone to really set those proper expectations at the top about how long it's going to take to launch a new product to a new market.
Yes, I was going to actually ask you about the education piece, how you implemented an education strategy. I'm curious about how you socialize that within the organization, because while I 100% agree and often tell clients we're going to implement a strategy that's really going to create awareness, and over time you will draw people to your solution. Sometimes the response is, but we need leads now.
Yeah. Yes,
like
of course.
Today, yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you respond when the CEO or the powers that be have that response to you.
Well, I did a little bit of pre-work prior to that.
Sure.
I worked with a client who was selling a lot of coffee and they hadn't run mobile before. And so I worked with them on that before I even brought that up to the executive team and the marketing team. So I went in and they had said to me, we don't have any budgets for this, Heather. And so I said, okay, what if I launched like an educational campaign with you over the next couple of weeks? And we did some things together to create that. And they ended up a few weeks later coming to me and saying, hey, we have a budget for this. And so we were working on that budget. But before it was even signed, I created a case study for it. And I went to the team and said, I have a case study that I'd like to present at the next company offsite about how an education led to sales, and it ended up being a signed contract. I think you have to show those examples. Anecdotes are really, really important, I found, for a lot of CEOs to bring that to life for them, saying, okay, here's the data, here's the revenue we think, but let me give you a few examples of what's really happening in the market. Because just remember, a lot of the executives don't have that luxury of spending time with the clients all the time. You do. So you need to be prepared to tell that story and have those active case studies top in front of your mind all the time to be able to say, I know this is going to work because we've seen this. Let's rinse and repeat this strategy with others to see that come to fruition.
That's so smart to build the credibility ahead of time.
If you can do it, that's the best way, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about differentiation, particularly in our industry. It's getting harder and harder in saturated markets. So what's been your approach to standing out?
It's such a good question. And I was thinking about it this week. I was at a conference talking about everything related to AI and how it's the most transformative force in any lifetime, not just this lifetime.
Sure.
And I bring that up because of the amount of new products and services that are able to launch almost overnight with not as many people running the company. And Scott Brinker, who I really respect, creates this MarTech map every year of all the different new tools in the industry. And at this point, there were over 15,900 different marketing tools. And that's a 9% increase year over year. And that's not even counting like all of the different, ad tech tools that we see in the market too. So when you think about that, you think, wow, let me put myself in the customer's shoes. That's an awful lot of tools to be able to evaluate. And I mean, there's no way you can possibly even know about all of them. The differentiation question's a really good one. And I would also say, AI again is making that even harder because even though we see a lot of M&A activity, the differentiation is going to continue to be so important because just companies are going to pop up out of nowhere. I want to bring a real life example to the table. When I started at MadTech a few years ago, nobody knew who we were. In fact, I'd go to my first conference with my CEO and everyone would say, oh, MadTech, that's cute. That's cute. What is that? And I wanted to turn that statement into, oh, yes, I've heard of you guys before. Because I think even just having that brand awareness starts to build credibility. So I think it's a lot to say, okay, I want everybody to understand exactly what we do really quickly. Instead, I said, well, based on the limited to zero marketing budget we had at the time, it's really hard to be a startup and try to invest in, creating brand awareness when you just don't have the resources to do that. So I focused on really 3 core things I think are important. One is partnerships. How can MadTech or any company that you're thinking of align yourself with companies that had more brand equity than we did, right? So included at the time platform partners like Snowflake or AWS, but also companies with bigger LinkedIn reach or event presence. So we partnered with AdTech, reaching out to him and saying, hey, and he has, thousands of followers in our industry. Is there something that we can do together? Let's meet for coffee. Let's talk about that. It doesn't even have to be like, let's work together, but something that we can partner with on. And that leads into event strategy. So our go-to-market for MadTech, I knew we had incredibly smart people. I knew we had an incredible smart product in MadConnect, but it was more about bringing that brand awareness and credibility to the table. So we leaned into very unique co-hosted events that people actually really wanted to attend. So not even just panels or happy hours, but really memorable experiences. And I brought in sponsors to pay for that and to start making money so that we can invest into our own marketing initiatives. And then content and category. So we started to have the name recognition, but wanting to attach ourselves now to the problems we wanted to own. I think a lot of companies overlook the fact that LinkedIn is really free. And with everything that's happening with AI, we have an incredible PR team that we could not do our job without, but writing bylines now and being able to take your ideas and polish them through ChatGPT or whatever that might be is something that everybody can do at this point and then publish to LinkedIn and start getting your voice out. And again, that's all free in the sense, right? So over time, attaching ourselves to a problem and then saying, okay, now this is how we solve it. So it's really about making ourselves appear bigger than we were through events and partnerships, which actually led us to become bigger. And it really, that moment that I brought before where, oh, MadTech, that's cute. Like, what is that? To, oh yeah, I've heard of those guys. And explain to me what you do again. And that way you can get the meetings you want and then be able to tell a really good story in the meeting and be able to differentiate yourself there. But sometimes it's just about getting the meeting. And last thing I'll say on this topic is I talk to companies all the time about this, where they really do have killer products, killer people, but just nobody knows about them. And you have to differentiate yourself in a very crowded market. It's so important.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you felt that you had a compelling story to tell. And once you got that story down, you sought out partners who kind of could complement that story in order to use them as a conduit to the rest of the market. That's
said very elegantly, and that's absolutely right.
Very smart. So as you are developing your company story, how do you create collaboration and adoption of that story internally before you're even bringing it to the market? How do you communicate cross-functionally?
Yes, I think that, we're a smaller organization growing bigger, like you said, every month for sure. But I think a lot of that goes into, I like everyone to be involved in our story that we're going to tell. So I would never create a story in a vacuum or work with one person, the marketing team, in a vacuum to create a new presentation or a new way of telling the story and then have a company meeting and say, this is what we're going to do. Getting buy-in from all different individuals, like especially in product marketing, you are at that intersection between sales, marketing, and product. So it is your responsibility to have those relationships and get that feedback from everyone. So you're also, and not to mention the customer, and getting that, understanding how the customer is talking about you. So the collaboration is really important to me, and having that open dialogue saying, this is the direction I think we're going to go in terms of the story. Right now we're launching of a new offering under MadConnect, which is really exciting, but socializing that with our head of product, with our product manager who's living and breathing this every single day with our customers, maybe talking to a customer about it, talking to the sales team, and getting that buy-in slowly so that when we do roll out that new sales story, everyone's feeling like they're a part of it because they actually are. They've contributed to it in some way. I was really stuck on a part of the story that I'm trying to develop yesterday. And I was meeting with someone on our sales team, and he said to me, do you need any help with the story? And I started to say, I think I've got it. And I said, well, wait a minute, actually, let me run it by you. And I started to have that conversation. He said, well, what if you use these words, or this is what our customer's been saying in market? And I said, that is incredible. Let me incorporate that in. Thank you. And so that is really important, to have that collaboration and open dialogue between teams so everyone feels like they've contributed.
Absolutely. It sounds like with your salesperson, they're out there speaking to the customers. I mean, as are you, but sometimes getting another perspective can be really helpful. What happens when there's a little bit of pushback? I know that sometimes I get pushback on, but these features, but what about this button? And everyone needs to know about that. Sometimes people get very excited about very specific features. And I'm always pushing towards, let's think one level higher.
Yeah.
Yes. Experience that?
Oh, yes, definitely. And we have a lot of smart people here. There's no question, and a lot of technical people. And we always say we're a product-led company. Well, with that comes a lot of individuals who want to tell the feature story first. And I get it. You're proud of that. You've built that. You're running the company, and that's something new and exciting, shiny button, to your point. But it's all about storytelling. It is people right now selling to people. And I think oftentimes we get so excited about the features, but I always try to put myself in someone else's shoes. And I bring up the waiter example because this is a true story about me. And I bring up to other people in my company when they start selling features too much. We go to a restaurant and my husband will say to me, you love a good waiter or a good waitress. And I'll say, it's not that. I just love a really good storyteller. So when I go to a restaurant and I sit down and someone comes over to the table and says, oh, the special tonight, my husband will look at me like, how's this going to go? And if they say, look, it's going to be a 6-ounce filet with mashed potatoes, I'm like, But if they say to you, okay, tonight's filet is going to feature, grass-fed beef, it's center cut, It's cooked over oak wood. It's served with a truffle butter that really melts into those mashed potatoes. We want you to pair that with a really nice, cab from Napa. And let me tell you about the winery. I'm buying what that person's selling, right? And I think about that example because it's storytelling. And to bring that restaurant example to an actual example that's happened in an organization is that I was at Publishers Clearinghouse for a number of years, as you mentioned, and we were the underdog. I mean, nothing really sexy about Publishers Clearinghouse. In fact, everyone sort of, when they thought Publishers Clearinghouse, they had a lot of negative connotations sometimes about the brand being sweepstakes driven. And sweepstakes was sort of like cheapening the brand name. And I remember sitting with our GM at one point and saying, look, this is just not working. Like, we're going into these meetings and agencies don't even want to take the meeting with us because they think we're sweepstakes. And we decided to change the narrative and change the way we were telling the story. And I know we were talking about features, but I think it all relates back to the actual story. And we said, instead of calling ourselves a sweepstakes company, let's talk about chance to win. And the fact that when an individual's in our environment and Publishers Clearinghouse and in the digital experience, they're hopeful, they're happy, right? They're optimistic. Maybe they're wanting to buy a product because they're in a mindset that they're going to win money. And when we started to tell the story a different way and start to romanticize the brand, that is when we started to unlock agency meetings and then agency dollars because the industry started to look at us differently than just a sweepstakes company. And so it's so important to be a really good storyteller. It's hard though, because again, you have a lot of, really smart people who want to talk about the features, but storytelling it's so incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that what you're describing is making that emotional connection, which is key to a great story. I also think it's very telling about your story about the description of the items on the menu is a kind of a great, almost like a case study in why everything comes down to being a salesperson in life.
Yes, 100%.
You do that faster than running your own consultancy like I do. That, as much as I have embraced and understood B2B tech sales and product marketing, when I became a consultant, truly realized the importance of having a good story to tell. You can't just come up with a laundry list or a menu. That's the starting point.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to Heather to dig a little deeper into her career and background in ad tech. Welcome back. We're talking to Heather Macaulay, who heads up go-to-market strategy as president of MadTech. Heather, you've had such an interesting career so far, and I'd love to get a little more insight about the things you've learned along the way. So looking back, can you recall and talk about an experience that shaped your leadership style or decision-making approach?
Sure. One in particular always stands out because I think it can apply to anyone in any role, which is to always be prepared. And to give an example and tell a quick story about that, when I was at a large SSP, I was fairly new to the organization and the company was changing around the way they talked about themselves in the story and sales collateral and the sales presentation. And I was going with the CEO at the time to a couple really big meetings, and he told me he was going to give the sales pitch. Don't worry about it. It's new material. I've got it. I want to try it out. And I said, okay. But I made sure, I just had a feeling. And I remember practicing in front of the mirror and practicing in front of my fiance at the time and really saying, I want to learn this story and I want to learn it really well. And I remember going to the first meeting with him and he did a beautiful job doing the sales presentation. And then we went to lunch and we started strategizing the next big meeting. And it was a really large meeting with a lot of, C-level executives in it. And 10 minutes before we went in, he looked at me and he said, I want you to give the presentation. And I remember that moment because I was nervous, but I was prepared. And I went in and I did a really good job because I was prepared. And he was excited and probably more proud of that. And so I tell my sales team, you have to prepare for every meeting. And I know you've been doing this for a long time, but prepare for the questions they're going to ask. Recite the story in front of the mirror. Talk to your kids about it. Talk to your cat or dog, just practice, and present in front of people who are smarter than you in different positions so that they can ask those really tough questions, because it's just so important to be prepared.
That's really interesting in terms of being thrown into the deep end. It's a little scary, but I bet you that helped with your confidence in the role throughout the rest of the time you were there.
It did. It definitely did. It was the type of environment that you did want to be prepared, and the executive team expect a lot of you. But I think it goes for any role I've been in any organization. You always want to make yourself look good.
Sure. So what is the worst piece of advice or conventional wisdom you've been told or you've heard?
I think that life is a balancing act. I'm a mother of 3 boys, and there is no way my life is properly balanced. When I think of the word balance, I think of being an even distribution of weight on both sides or all the sides. And I don't look at life that way, especially being a working mother, or even before I had kids, having a partner in life or having hobbies. And instead, I look at my life like a pie chart, almost like that. The circle stays the same, but every month or so, I have to decide how much of that 24 hours in a day I'm going to give to my kids versus my home versus my husband versus even self-care for myself. Mm-hmm. Because a wise woman once told me that you cannot optimize all parts of your life at the same time. And you really have to do a check-in with yourself every quarter or every year to realize what you're willing to give up and not give up for your career. So I do think that people say that all the time, oh, it's a balance, and they don't mean anything harmful by it. But to me, like this month, for instance, I'm traveling so much for work, and I had to sit my, kids down and say, Mom has to really put a lot into work this month. There's a lot going on. And then from there, I can spend a little bit more time with my kids because I've invested so much in my career over the next month. So it's not a balancing act, so to speak. Mm-hmm. It looks a little bit different. So that's some career advice that I just don't totally believe in. I just look at it a little bit differently.
Sure. That makes sense. Sometimes, though, the best insights kind of come from outside of work. Is there anything that you do outside of work? It could be for fun or some other activity, but that you've noticed it also helps you do your job better, even though it really has nothing to do with your job.
Yeah. So let's see. I play the piano. I was a classically trained pianist when I was younger, and I got away from it for quite some time, and I started to come back to it. And what I find is in between calls, I will play the piano and I'll bring out my old classical music, and it really helps reset me. Sometimes in between calls, I have like 15 minutes, and just playing the piano, it almost works a different part of your brain. And I do feel when I come back to a call, I'm a little bit more refreshed, and it just helps me relax and distress a little bit. And I encourage, my kids to play a musical instrument even here and there, but that's just something that not a lot of people know about me that I still do to this day.
That's so fun. It probably works a different part of your brain.
It
wakes it up.
It does for sure. And I think learning some of the pieces over again is a new challenge for me. And hearing, my kids love hearing me play as well. So it's a win-win.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, as we wrap up, I like to ask people if there's a piece of advice or a lesson learned earlier in your career that still influences you today.
I think, and it's something I brought back from that educational part of it, is that, it sounds a little cliche but providing real value. And I think we can often overlook that when we have conversations in market. And I think that if you leave your customers with something that is really going to add value to them and to their life, and even make them smarter in a meeting, that goes a long way. And oftentimes, again, we think of ourselves as marketers and salespeople and trying to drive revenue and have our customers buy our products and buy our services, but providing value and some education to them and teaching them something they may not have known, that's just very, very important.
That's great. That's an excellent note to wrap up on. So with that, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yes, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or happy to have some people email with me directly as well at heather@madtech.io.
Fantastic. I'll put that in our show notes. Heather, thank you so much for being a guest on The Last Word on Product Marketing. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on all the major platforms and check out the YouTube channel for videos. Thank you for listening.